Hello, everyone, and welcome into CrushTheStreet.com. I'm Kenneth Amaduri, and I'm joined today with a returning guest. Her name is Jen Briney, and she's the host of the Congressional Dish podcast. And she dives deeper, more than anyone I know, when it comes to the bills that are being passed in Congress that become law. And she follows what politicians do and not just what they say. So I wanted to talk to her today more about why the system we have in place, as far as our government is concerned, is out of control and unmanageable. So, Jen, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thanks for having me.
Jen, last time we briefly talked about CISA in our past interview, but I wanted to focus on it more this time around. And just recently, Congress passed CISA by hiding it in the middle of a sure-to-pass spending bill, and Obama signed it into law, even though the Department of Homeland Security had previously said that the bill will hurt national security and destroy privacy. How in the world did this bill get passed?
Well, so we have something that our government is supposed to work one way, and the people that we've elected to represent us are not doing it properly. So what's happening is, instead of our government being funded in 12 separate appropriations bills that are carefully considered and passed by the House and the Senate and then signed by the president, what we're getting year after year are these giant government funding bills that are signed in a moment of crisis. And it happened again. So instead of having 12 different bills, we had one massive bill. It was 2,009 pages. And it was passed into law in under 3 days. It was released at 1:34 a.m. on a Wednesday, and they voted on it before noon on Friday, and it was signed into law on Friday afternoon. So they definitely didn't have time to read this. But because the repercussions of it not becoming law would be a government shutdown, not everyone, there were some people that didn't vote for it, but a vast majority of people in Congress just voted for it, even though they didn't know everything that was in it. And I don't think that that's a reflection on our system. I think that's a reflection on these people that are currently in Congress, because it doesn't have to be this way. And so what happened is they were working on CISA, or a cybersecurity bill. And there were two bills that had passed the House, and there was one that had passed the Senate. CISA had passed the Senate. And what they were supposed to do was take these three bills and merge them into one and have it be voted on its own in the House and the Senate once they got one bill that was identical in both branches. And instead of doing that, they had this package of cybersecurity bills that came really out of nowhere and was stuck into the government funding bill. It was over 1,700 pages deep, so some people didn't even know it was in it when they voted. And the legislation wasn't vastly different from what we had seen before. Most of CISA actually made it in, but there was parts in there that had never been seen before by either the House or the Senate, and then they just became law. So this is not the way things are supposed to be done.
So just on CISA, who's going to benefit from this bill that was just snuck into the spending bill that, as you described and as you clearly point out, was just passed in a moment's notice?
Definitely every private company that wants to share government or share data with the government, because the main point of this legislation was to give immunity to every private company that wants to share data. And the thing is that it does say in the legislation that the data transmitted has to be cyber threat indicators. The problem is that the way that they defined cyber threat indicators is so broad that it can be just about anything. And so yeah, if the companies are able to say that they're sharing the data for a cybersecurity purpose because of a cybersecurity threat, and there's nothing in the legislation making sure that the threat is legitimate. They can just say that their data was threatened. If data is threatened, that data can be turned over. So it just makes it very, very easy for these companies to get immunity. And big picture here, what's going on is that back in the Patriot Act days, the government was just taking data. So they were attaching stuff to the wires at the internet hubs, so that they were just collecting everything that went over the digital wires. Well, after the Edward Snowden revelations, that became much harder to do. And so the USA Freedom Act changed the game. So instead of the government collecting data and storing it on their own servers, what they're doing now is having the private companies store the data. And now they're trying to get that data from the private companies voluntarily. So in order to get these companies to voluntarily turn over any data the government wants, they had to give them immunity, and I think this is how they did it.
So aside from just immunity, what other motivation would a private company have to hand over this information? Why would they want to give this information to the government?
Well, part of it does have cybersecurity purposes. You know, let's say some intruder is in their system. There are reasons why they would want to have the government's help in trying to figure out what to do about that, because the government does have, you know, lots of money and probably has technology that the private companies don't have to help them secure their system. So that is an aspect of it. But really, I don't know what the scenarios would be. And I think that is what Congress is trying to figure out. Because you have to remember, the intelligence community wants this data from the private companies. And the private companies don't really have an incentive. And I think that the people in government currently consider that a problem. Whereas a customer of the private companies, I consider that a good thing, that there's companies that might have an incentive to protect my data. And so I think this is just one way to say, hey, private companies, you have nothing to lose if you give us this data that we're seeking. So I think it's a way to entice private companies. I don't think this was done particularly for them. I think this was done for the intelligence community.
So why is this bill a threat to our privacy, or why should we be concerned about our privacy being exposed to the government?
Well, because this legislation specifically allows the information transferred to be used against us in court for a lot of things that have nothing to do with cybersecurity. And so that is the danger, that data could be transferred by private companies to the government, which the government can then sift through and pick stuff out that they can use against you in court. It's another way of getting information without a warrant. And then because of the immunity, if you decide to go to the private company that turned over your data and say, hey, you shouldn't have given this to the government, well, there's nothing you can do because the lawsuits have to be automatically dismissed. That's the danger.
Jen, and going back now to the spending bill, did they agree to actually spend less in the next year, or did it actually increase?
They increased everything. They increased everything from defense, non-defense. They increased everything. So anyone telling you that they're fiscally conservative in this Congress is lying.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Their actions are speaking much louder than their words, and it's no wonder why you have so much disdain for both sides of the party, or both sides of the aisle, because you see their actions, you see what they do in the moment of truth. So, did both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, get things they wanted included in this bill that, let's say, wouldn't have been passed if they had a lot more time to talk about it and deliberate?
Yes. I mean, definitely. And I can't tell you where that falls in the party line because we were never given a debate. You know, there were no hearings on this omnibus legislation. There was no debate. There was really no way to figure out who put what in the bill. In fact, I can't even tell you who wrote this thing. It's 2,009 pages, and I can't figure out who is responsible for it. So I can't really tell you who got what, but I can tell you that it was probably going to be harder for the Democrats to get the wind and solar tax credits extended had they not done it in this manner. And I can tell you that the Democrats would have put up a giant fight for the Republicans' wish to repeal the oil export ban. So yes, both parties got stuff by jamming it into this omnibus spending bill, and both parties get stuff every year that they do it like this. What's frustrating is when you watch them in the one hearing that they have in the Rules Committee, everybody says, well, this is not the way government should be funded, and no one wants to do it this way. Yet they do it this way year after year after year. So at a certain point, you have to believe that because they're all getting something out of it, that even though they say they don't like it this way, this is really when things get done, is right before Christmas every year. This is when the most stuff becomes law in these monster packages.
Jen, you mentioned that it's the politicians' fault for this and not the system, and I actually wanted to ask you about that. And for me, at least, it just seems like the system in place is broken beyond the point where even if I was elected or you were elected, it's beyond fix to actually do something. Because if we were in that situation of having to pass a bill or the government shuts down, we would kind of be pinned up against the wall. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, is the system to blame or the people? I just wanted you to expand on that.
Well, the way that the House is run is determined by the leadership. And so they're making rules that aren't in the Constitution. So the way that it's being run is being determined by individuals, not by the way that the system was designed. In fact, we've seen things like fast-track legislation, which allows trade agreements to move through faster, which are end runs around the Constitution, because these things that are international treaties should be voted on as international treaties. And these individuals are choosing to not do that by passing laws that get them around the Constitution. So these people are the ones that are responsible. When it comes to our system, we also have to remember that if anybody is suggesting that we throw out the constitutional system that we have, well, the people that are going to write the new one are these individuals too. So they're probably going to write the rules even more officially in their own favor. We have a big problem right now that we've allowed these two parties to control our system, and in a lot of ways they collude to control it in their own benefit. And that, I think, is the bigger issue. We're having a tough time getting normal people, just third parties or even just individuals, getting into Congress to make any kind of real change. As long as we only accept Republicans and Democrats as our representatives, I think we're going to continue to have this problem.
Yeah, the American people don't have real options. It's one or the other, and it's not much of an option at all.
See, I disagree with that. I think we do have other options. We're just not exercising them.
Right.
On the presidential scale, that really is rigged by the Democratic and Republican parties. However, when it comes to Congress, independents can run. It's just that every state right now is making different rules. And unfortunately, the state laws are also being rigged by Democratic and Republican parties. And so I'm going to do an episode in the next couple months here where I'm going to go down all 50 states and tell you what it takes to get onto the ballot as an independent. Some states are completely reasonable, and it's actually quite easy to get your name on the ballot as an independent. Some states have been thoroughly rigged. And so I think that's the process that we need to start looking at, is how do we get independents into the system on the congressional level? Because I don't really see a lot of people trying. In fact, in Georgia, which is one of the most rigged states, half of the representatives last year ran unopposed. So it's really hard to kick someone out and fire them when there's no other options, quite literally. So that's up to us to step up and run. And I think by getting the information out there and letting people know how that's actually done, I think that's how we can get more regular people into the system.
Yeah, no, that's what I was going to say. When it comes to just trying to deal with a massive population that doesn't do any research, it's hard to get things done. But as far as being out there and doing what you do and educating people, that's a way to see some progress in our system.
And the beautiful thing is that, I mean, both you and I right now are talking to each other on our laptops, and yet thousands of people can hear us. So we're not doing anything that other people can't copycat and add to. So this actually gives me an enormous amount of hope that we're able to change the system using the internet, which wasn't possible even 10 years ago. No. So I do have hope for the future. I have a lot of hope for the future and for the system that we currently have.
Jenna, I want to get your thoughts on the Middle East, and specifically in the research that you do. And we know that our government has been heavily involved in the conflicts in the Middle East and Russia and China. And there are major efforts to protect the stability of the dollar and their interests in the Middle East. From your perspective in the research of the bills and laws you do, have you uncovered anything regarding the true agenda of what the U.S. is doing in this region?
Well, one thing that was a big eye-opener was I did an episode on Syria, and really I was just watching a hearing because I was interested in it. And what I found in this hearing, which was supposedly, about ISIS, was that ISIS isn't our number one concern in Syria. It's really getting rid of the Assad regime, who's favoring more with Russian interests when it comes to fossil fuel transportation pipelines. And so since about 2011, we've been trying to get rid of Assad. And then when you hear that Russia is now bombing Syria in addition to us, they're not bombing Syria because of ISIS. They're bombing Syria because we are trying to overthrow another government. We're just doing it more stealthy this time than we did in Iraq. So I think that is something that our media has really let us down on, and letting us know why we're actually in Syria. ISIS is a factor. It's just not the number one factor. And that episode, that was one of the most fascinating things I think I've done on Congressional Dish, because it was clear as day in this hearing, which was not aired on C-SPAN, what they were actually trying to do. ISIS was not the focus.
So who's pulling the strings in our government when it comes to the agenda of the Middle East? And if you have an opinion on that.
My new obsession is the State Department, because I've always kind of ignored the State Department and looked more at the Department of Defense for, understanding why we're doing things with, bombs,
yeah,
which made a little bit of sense. But now I'm realizing that it's the State Department that you really want to watch to understand the why. They're doing the negotiations. They're working with the International Monetary Fund, which is, going around the world and giving out these giant loans that these countries can never pay back in order to get these countries to change their economic laws. All of this is being done through the Department of State. And this is a new revelation for me. I didn't quite realize this. And so I'm really shifting my focus in this new year to watching what the State Department is doing and what the State Department is saying. And I think that's where we're going to get more answers than the Defense Department. The Defense Department is the muscle, but they're taking orders from state.
Yeah, I mean, I watched a video yesterday, and it was very emotional. ISIS came out with a video with 3 men getting executed publicly for spying on them, being accused of spying on them. And the footage was just barbaric, seeing these men's heads literally explode as they were shot. And so my question is, what is the sick relationship that our government or elites have with this group, this ISIS group? Because obviously ISIS, their intentions are real, but there's this dynamic of motivation and just leading this group to act in a certain way for the agendas of the people in power to get what they want. And I'm just curious, what is that goal and what is this dynamic? I know I asked a lot of things there, but just your thoughts.
Well, my thoughts on ISIS are that we know that its origins came from the power vacuum that was left in Iraq. We bombed a country, and we didn't just bomb it, we took over a country. And the government there was never really put back in place. And so these people wanted their own territory. And when it really comes down to it, that's what this is about. It's about these people wanting to control some land for themselves. And of course, they're doing it in very violent ways. But we also have to remember that these groups were the moderate rebels that we were funding at one time or another to fight whoever in Iraq and Syria. And what happens is these people take the guns that we give them, and then they join their own gangs. In this particular instance, we're talking about ISIS, but there's also something called Daesh. Like, there's a bunch of different groups that we don't understand. But a lot of the weapons and the funding that they've come from comes in one way or another through us and Britain and from NATO, because what we're trying to do is not put our own soldiers on the ground. We're trying to fund these groups. We're trying to give weapons and money to groups of Middle Eastern people so that they will fight for us. They'll do the fighting and they'll do the dying. And unfortunately, they don't just take our orders. And so that is part of the ISIS origin. Now, where it is now and what we're being told on the news, I don't know what to believe, because ISIS is definitely the new boogeyman. My own mother is afraid of ISIS. And so this is justifying a lot of our own actions. I mean, yes, it's barbaric for these people to shoot people in the head, but it's also barbaric for us to be bombing them from the sky. And so there's a lot of barbarism going on, and it excuses our own actions because we're saying that we have to fight ISIS over there so they don't come here, even though in the Syria episode, the State Department themselves are saying there's only a handful of people that are here in the United States. It's really not that big of a threat to us. This is what they're telling to our Congress when no one is watching. But on the news, they make it seem like ISIS is going to kill us all tomorrow, you know?
Are you concerned about ISIS infiltrating if they did start accepting an influx of refugees from Syria?
No. No, because the refugees are the people that are just trying to get out of this whole mess. Like, remember what a refugee is. A refugee is a person like me who is living in a house that is now in a war zone and is trying to get myself and my family out. That's a refugee. If they were going to join ISIS, they would do it at home in Syria. They're not trying to come to the United States to bomb us. They're trying to just keep their kids safe. So I understand why people are afraid, because if you turn on the TV, they're being told to be afraid. They're being told very, very scary things. But no, I'm not afraid of ISIS.
Okay, yeah, no, it's a great point. I mean, and there are a lot of people in Syria and these refugees who are just, who've been totally destabilized, and they're homeless, and they need help, and they're very friendly, and they're just poor victims of an unfortunate situation. But I do understand the threat is, okay, well, if we start accepting these people, ISIS might use this as a way to infiltrate and commit more terrorist attacks, like we saw in San Bernardino or Paris and things like that. And like I said, it's hard to know what to believe.
San Bernardino and Paris, there's no known connections to any of these terror organizations. San Bernardino, those people were Californians, and the people in Paris, they were Belgium, they weren't refugees. So to pick on the victims, I mean, these people are having their houses bombed. They're having ISIS trying to control their neighborhoods. I mean, these are the victims. So for us to say that they are ISIS, I mean, it's just another level of cruel, especially if we don't take into account our own responsibility for the situation. We've been trying to turn over Syria's government now since 2011, and we are bombing that country, and France is bombing that country, and now Britain is bombing that country, and Russia is bombing that country. I mean, can you blame these people for trying to leave?
No, and it's not the refugees. It would be ISIS infiltrating and coming over as a refugee, and I think that's where to be fair, that is where the fear is. Not so much them being poor and refugees, but it's ISIS taking it as an opportunity, because ISIS has a lot of money and they're able to pay a lot of people, and people are willing to die for jihad. And if they can use this up as an opportunity to do more damage, I think it's fair to say that they might.
Well, I mean, for us in the United States to think that we're never going to take a hit when we're bombing countries all over the world, I mean, I think that's a little naive to begin with. What are we going to do? Become a completely closed society? Say, all right, you're in these borders, you can never leave and you can never come back in. I mean, we can either, and that's honestly restricting freedom. Right. If we believe in freedom in this country, shutting ourselves down is not how we do this. We need to understand that sometimes in the United States, people are going to die. I mean, we've seen it already with just random Americans shooting each other wherever. And yet we don't react the same way to that, the way we do if they come from the Middle East. People die in the United States when people want to take revenge for whatever reason. And ISIS is just one more motivation. But in San Bernardino, from all that I've read, this guy shot up his coworkers, and we saw that in the 90s when people were going postal. Yeah. People take out revenge for whatever reason. And in the Middle East, we're doing a lot of killing. We really are. And I think that's something that we as Americans need to accept. So is it possible that someone could be a very effective liar and make it into the United States? Sure. But that's true regardless of whether or not we're letting victims into this country.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. And it's a very, very complicated situation, to say the least. So Jen, it's about 23 minutes, and I told you I would be short with you. I want to give you an opportunity to just give everyone an idea of where they can find you and what they can expect to get when they visit your website and visit your podcast.
Well, Congressional Dish is now weekly, except I am taking New Year's weekend off. But Congressional Dish is weekly, and what you can get is just whatever is going on in Congress. So the last two episodes, I have one on the Omnibus, which is that giant government spending bill, and you can find out everything I was able to discover by scanning all 2,000 pages. And then the follow-up episode, which will be released this Sunday, is about the cybersecurity legislation in particular. I read that in detail, so I can give you at least what I understand it to be. But yeah, every week you'll hear either a hearing or you'll get some kind of information related to what's going on in your government. And it's really not about politics. It's about governing. And so again, it's called Congressional Dish. You can find it on the internet on congressionaldish.com. You can find it in iTunes, Stitcher, or any of the podcast apps. And then also there's a free Congressional Dish app. So if you go to the iTunes App Store or to Google Play, you can look up Congressional Dish and download it right to your phone, and you'll be the first to get all of the episodes, and the show notes will come directly to your phone.
Well, that's Jen Briney, everybody. Jen, thanks so much for taking the time today and sharing your knowledge, your abundance of research with us over here at crushthestreet.com.
Oh, it was my pleasure.